Well, hopefully you enjoyed the Stanford Prison Experiment video. And I wanted to talk just a second about some of the controversy that surrounds this video, or this experiment in general. My son-in-law showed me some discussion that was going on the internet a couple of years ago, talking about how the whole thing was faked, and that some of the participants who had been assigned to be prisoners reported that that they were just faking everything that they did, and that some of the guards said that that Zimbardo told them to act in the draconian ways that they did, and so on. My son-in-law, not being a psychology student, doesn't really get how actually everything that was in that little discussion is evidence for what Zimbardo said happened. That basically he put people into roles, and those roles affected their attitudes. You know, even if what you're doing is you're acting like you think a prisoner would act, you've taken on the role. Isn't that the whole idea of a role? Is that you're acting the way that you think you're supposed to because that's your role. So they internalize that a prisoner would act upset, or they internalize that a prisoner would maybe want to freak out to get out, or they internalize that this is what is involved in the role of a prisoner, and they display those behaviors. The guards saying that this is what Zimbardo told them to do. Well, isn't that part of the training that a guard would get, right? Is to be told to use, whatever tactics would work, and here's your billy club, and here are your mirrored sunglasses, and the tools were provided to the guards by Zimbardo, who was playing the role of the warden. And so the guards internalized what it meant to be in the role of guard, and they displayed the behaviors that are consistent with that. So they can say later that it was all fake or whatever, but at the time, those prisoners who wanted out were in distress. If they were faking it, they were faking it pretty hard. One of the things that Zimbardo has repeatedly said at conferences and other places is that the biggest mistake he made in that study was that he took the role of warden. As a scientist, he should not have been involved in the prison structure at all, because what happened is that in his role of warden, which he accepted way too fully, he was taking the sides of the guards when he should not have. And so he was kind of egging them on. He was. And it wasn't that was this criticism that his egging them on made the experiment faulty in the sense of not real outcomes. That's an incorrect argument, because his egging on would be very similar to what you would expect to see from an actual warden toward actual guards. So the roles were all present, and the power of the roles were all present. And in fact, he talked about how much he got swept away in his role as guard or as warden, so that it clouded his judgment. And I think that's what you saw in the video, where he and his then girlfriend and now wife, she's like, I don't even know who you are. And, honestly, he looks back on it and he's like, I don't know who I became in that situation. The role was that powerful for everybody. And, only an outsider who wasn't swept up in it could see it with clear eyes and say, you are abusing these kids. You need to knock this off. And both sides, not just the prisoners, the guards were being abused too, because think about the guilt that they had to carry with them, that they behaved in the way that they did. It just shows you the power of the situation. It shows you how much being in a particular role causes you to hold attitudes and act in certain ways. The way that you're acting causes you to start having, in the case of the guards, more callous attitudes towards the prisoners. Behaving like a prisoner makes the prisoner start to have more helpless attitudes, more feelings of despair, things like that. Zimbardo playing the role of the warden, he had like these attitudes of power, and he could decide whatever he wants, kind of thing, which is probably what his everyday life is like, given the position he has anyway. But in the role of a warden, that could be really harmful. So Nathaniel Hawthorne said, "No man for any considerable period can wear one face to himself and another to the multitude without finally getting bewildered as to which may be the true face." And that's a really good message for all of us as we move through different roles and try to maintain a consistent sense of self, right? Like, why am I being friendly to customers who are being so disagreeable? Like, this is not what I would normally do. Those kinds of things that we have to reconcile about how we behave in different roles. Our role as parent, for example, I know that there have been times in my children's upbringing, especially when they were, between probably 10 and 20, when there were times when I was like, I'm not sure what my decision should be, but I know that I need to make one. I know I need to make one. So I would engage in a parental behavior, and then ultimately it would change my attitude about the behavior that the kids had engaged in, and make me justify my reaction or question my reaction or whatever. It's a really good message to internalize, this idea that when we have got ourselves divided across lots of different roles, we could ultimately get very confused. Now, this one's a little more straightforward. Fake it till you make it, right? Because sometimes we suffer from something called imposter syndrome. We get ourselves into a role that we really want, but we're not really sure we're qualified for. We're like questioning ourselves. We're wondering whether somebody else is going to figure out that we shouldn't really be doing this. I'll use parenting again, because I remember when I was leaving the hospital with my firstborn, my husband and I said to each other, somebody's going to stop us, right? Because we should not be leaving a hospital with a small human. We do not know what we're doing. He's the 8th of 8 children. I'm the second of 2 children. I was the youngest person in my family. Neither one of us had ever babysat. We were like, what are we doing? There is no way they should be letting us leave the hospital with this little human. The good news about little humans is that you are, in fact, smarter than an infant. And so as they grow and develop, you're like a couple steps ahead of them the whole time. So that's the good news, because their needs are simple when they're little. And we're like, okay, we can do this. But we were terrified because we weren't sure we were capable of what it would take to be able to keep a little person alive. But guess what we did? We faked it till we made it. We kept changing her diaper and feeding her food and giving her baths. And we're like, next thing you know, we actually seemed to be understanding what she needed, stuff like that. And so fake it till you make it is not a bad principle, right? Now, I gave you parenting. A lot of times that's just sort of thrust upon you, right? Now you're a parent. But if you get into the professional world, and you start to question yourself, do I really belong here? I had those self-doubts when I got into graduate school. I kept waiting, and I finally uttered this self-doubt that I was having towards, to one of my classmates, and she's like, I feel the same way, which it turned out everybody in our class felt the same way, that somebody was going to come tap me on the shoulder and say, you know what, we accidentally sent that acceptance letter to you, and we meant to send it to someone else, so I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave. And it turned out all of us had that fear that we really couldn't fill this role. But we faked it till we could make it, right? You just put one foot in front of the other, and you say, you know what, this is just more school, I can do this. And next thing you know, you can actually, succeed and graduate with a PhD in psychology and go, maybe I was intended to be here. It turned out okay. But so the role that you're playing, if you really embrace it and you get engaged in it, next thing you know, you really are, exemplary for that role. So that's my little buoying of your spirits moment where I want to encourage you on that. So there are three theories that really attempt to explain how behavior leads to attitudes. The first one was the cognitive dissonance theory. The second one is the self-presentation theory. That idea is that we may automatically pretend that we hold attitudes that are consistent with our behaviors. This theory, the big difference between it and cognitive dissonance is that it doesn't assert any dissonance. It doesn't say that you have to feel upset about the fact that you behaved inconsistently. Instead, you behave in some way, you immediately say, I did it because I wanted to. I did it because that's what I think is right. I did it because that's how I am, whatever. Self-perception theory, on the other hand, says that when we're unsure of our attitudes, we infer them by looking at our behavior and the circumstances under which it occurs. So if we're not sure what we think about something, we will look back on things that we've done to try and get evidence for what we must think, right? So we're really trying to understand ourselves in self-perception theory and using our previous behavior as data, really, to help us to understand why we acted the way that we did. When we are most likely to use self-perception theory as our explanation for our behavior is when we really can't blame it super easily on I had to, right? Like one of my chronic problems is that I'm either early or I'm late. I can never just be on time for things. Like if I see that I need to be somewhere in 15 minutes and it's like a 5-minute walk to get there, I'll say, oh, I have time to do something else. And then I'll spend 14 minutes doing something else, and then I'll be 4 minutes late to my wherever I'm going. Like, that's a really chronic problem for me, and I do it in an effort to not have to waste 10 minutes when I get there early. And a lot of times when it involves traffic, I can say, oh, traffic got snarled and I didn't expect it, or some other pretty bad lie that really isn't why I'm late, but it looks like it's why I'm not. I actually had to do some self-perception and look at myself and say, why do I keep thinking that it's worthwhile to, be late to something so that I can do a couple extra minutes on something else? Like, what is that? What am I doing? And I had to do, this whole process of looking back at what do I chronically do that causes me to be chronically late. And I'm never late to class like that because I know I have to go to class and I don't start something right before. So I'll just go to class early, right? But if it's a meeting and I don't really want to be there, that's when you find that I'll do this. And so through self-perception theory, I realized, well, my attitude is I don't want to go. Basically, once you accept that fact and then you realize, okay, but I have to go, right? Then you can say, what can I do to make sure that my behavior is in alignment with my ultimate attitude, which is my ultimate attitude is I don't want to be that person who's late. You don't want to walk in late, right? So my ultimate attitude being that, my acute attitude being, well, I don't want to waste my time and sit there with nothing to do for 10 minutes or whatever. I put it all together. Now my self-perception is all intact where I realize, okay, so get there early. Like as soon as you know it's time to leave, go ahead and leave. And then take something with you so you can occupy yourself so you're not wasting 10 minutes. Like take something easy. Take something that is portable. And la-di-da, I have found myself behaving a lot more consistently with my actual attitude of not wanting to be late ever since I've done that self-perception, sort of look back on my behaviors and stuff. So just to wrap this up sort of visually, if we look at something like self-justification for engaging in a behavior we know we shouldn't, the example here is smoking. So why would we, how do we use cognitive dissonance to account for, our continued smoking? Self-justification. I've been waiting for this all day. I deserve it, is one thing we might say. But I know that smoking is bad for me, right? That's the incongruent thing. So now I'm experiencing a little dissonance. Then I go, oh, well, you know what? Statistics, they're probably overblown and everything. Anyway, I'm a healthy person. I'm probably not going to get sick from this. It'll be fine, right? So with cognitive dissonance explanation, you go through that period of recognizing that you're doing something harmful, feeling uncomfortable because you know that you don't want to be the kind of person who does something harmful. And so you soften the attitude about how harmful it is. Well, it's probably not really that bad. Self-presentation theory would say that you're concerned with impression management. So maybe the reason why you continue to smoke, even if you are aware that it's harmful, is because it looks cool, right? That's what my mom said that got her going with smoking is, how cool it looks. And so it's easy to continue on with it if you really believe that I'm presenting myself as a cool person or a person who has, an appearance that other people would internalize the way that I want them to, right, by smoking. It gives an impression that I want to have. And then there's the self-perception theory that says that we do self-observation and look back on our own behaviors and stuff like that. So here she is saying, here I am smoking again. I must really like smoking, right? As I'm standing outside in the wintertime by myself, looking cool, but doing something I know that is harmful. I must really like it. Or I must be under a lot of stress and need it, or whatever other, explanation that the person can come up with to explain why they're doing something that they look back in their past and they say, I keep doing this. There must be a reason why I keep doing it. Oh, it's because I like it, right? So that's how these three different theories can kind of explain how behavior leads to attitudes. Hopefully over the course of this chapter, I've made it clear that really much more likely your behaviors lead you to form attitudes than your attitudes lead to behaviors. And the great thing about knowing that is that you can take more control of that. You can say to yourself, okay, for the things that I do have very clear attitudes, things I know what I think and I do value it, I can make sure that I behave in ways that are consistent with it and not do this backwards, attempt to explain why I behaved differently than my attitudes. So knowing this about ourselves gives us power. So hopefully you enjoyed that, and I will see you guys in the next chapter.